We're here today with Professor Dan Ariely. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Let me start with the first question. So you conduct research, write, and talk about behavioral economics. User experience practitioners conduct research with potential or existing users of products. Recommendations that emerge from such user research have been proven to help products become more useful and usable for people. And the challenge user experience practitioners have is that many engineers, marketeers, and executives are predictably irrational. They believe their intuition leads them to make the right product design choices. What are your thoughts on this problem?
Yeah, so I think the real issue with design is that you're trying to design for somebody that you don't perfectly understand. And not only that, but there's something called the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge is the idea that as you get to know something better, it becomes harder and harder for you to understand the people who don't know that. And professors, of course, have it all the time, right? The better I get in what I do, the more difficulty I have to realize where my students find difficulty and what they find trivial. That's why new professors, I think, when they learn just 2 weeks before the class is, actually often do a good job. Physicians have these problems all the time. If you're a physician and you always dealt with cancer all your life, and you tell somebody, hey, you have cancer, you think they can basically go at all the literature and understand the cost and benefit and figure out how to do. I think the curse of knowledge, together with some vision, is a big barrier to let opinions from other people penetrate. Now, you know, as a social scientist, I basically go against economics most of the time. I take ideas from economics and I try to see when they work and when they don't work. I mostly find that they don't work, and then I try to teach economists or convince economists that their intuitions or beliefs are erroneous. And economists have economic theory, which is kind of like a religion that basically creates a barrier for penetration of any new information. So any new information I present, they discount the information in some sense. And I believe that engineers are probably like that as well. They have some vision that is kind of religious-like about what the product needs to be and what's good engineering and so on. And that creates a barrier to let new ideas emerge. And it's not a perfect solution. My solution is basically to try and be scientific about it. What the scientific method is supposed to do is to say, we just don't know. Are you willing to admit that you don't know? Let's do a test. Let's turn it out and let's just see what happens. Now, if you don't do a test with the engineers, they might discount your test, which is sometimes happens to me as well. But I think the ideal is to come up with the engineers and say, okay, how would you test that? Let's create a few conditions. What's your prediction? Where do you think things happen? And therefore, improve things. And I also think it's worthwhile investing in, because once you show people that they're wrong once, I think it will be easier to do a second time. There's a story that in Rome, when somebody would win a battle, they would come through Rome and they would have a big parade for them, and everybody would cheer, and they would get all kinds of gifts and flowers and so on. But they also had a slave, and the slave would walk next to them and whisper in their ear, memento mori, which basically says, remember that you're mortal. I think in the business domain, we need to hire people to whisper in the ears of CEOs and engineers, and even user experience people. Yeah. Remember you might be irrational, remember you might be irrational. And this idea that we should be a bit more modest about our predictions and not trust our intuitions to a very high degree, I think is incredibly useful lesson. It's just hard to achieve.
So that leads me to the next question. How do you deal with people who have very strong intuitions? How do you persuade them to recognize their assumptions and test those intuitions?
So I'll tell you what I do with my students. Mm-hmm. I basically start the class by showing them visual illusions. Okay. Right? And for me, visual illusions are an incredible demonstration of bad intuition. Right? You look at a visual illusion, you turn something off, you say, you see this was a mistake. What would happen here if you trusted your intuition? Right? And it's also one of those things that happen to everybody. You can't say, ooh, I'm better at it. Other people have this visual illusion, I don't. So I basically start by creating an understanding that we have this flawed mechanism between our ears. It's a fantastic mechanism, does all kinds of things well, but we do have these built-in biases. And once people are willing to accept that, at least in a visual illusion, which is a very good skill we have, right? We do vision very, very well. We have some biases. Then I say, and what about other things? Right? What are some other intuitions? And if relying on just our senses lead us astray in vision, should we rely just on our logic in other things? And then I basically say, okay, so now let's look at something that we're doing. And let's separate what we know from what we think. And that actually has been quite an interesting experience, because sometimes I go into companies and I say, what do we know and what do we think we know? And they say, oh, this thing we know. And I say, how did you test it? How do you really know it? And I say, well, and often you realize that things that people think they know, they don't really know. Or there was a focus group, or they heard something. I'll give you an example. We went to a big bank at some point, and they told us that people who have credit cards with the name of the universities pay those credit cards faster. And they had a theory that this is because people have higher affinity to their university, their alma mater, and they care more about these cards, so they send them better. And they were going to spend a tremendous amount of money building businesses with these universities to get their cards to those people, because the risk is lower because people pay to a higher degree. And they've said they've tested it, everybody knows it, it's well proven. And we said, how do you really know? And when we looked into it, nobody actually had any piece of evidence directly to it. So we went back into the data, and it was true. People who have these credit cards pay them faster, but it doesn't mean that they would pay any card faster, right? So we took people who had two credit cards, one with the name of the university and one without. Turns out there was no difference. So what happened is that the name of the university on the card doesn't seem to have any difference. But of course, people who went to universities, particularly expensive universities, are more likely to pay their credit anyway. But what they thought was the benefit was not really the benefit. So that's an interesting fact. But there was this understanding in the company that that's what was driving the behavior. And it was really quite incredible to observe. And by the way, I'm not sure we've convinced them, even though we showed it to them with their data.
All right. Many software development organizations are what's called achieving failure. They are building something that nobody wants, doing it on time, on budget, and with high quality and beautiful designs. They successfully execute the wrong plan. How can this be prevented?
So, first of all, there's a question of whether we should prevent failures.
Okay.
Think about restaurants, right? Most restaurants fail. Most people who open restaurants waste a tremendous amount of time and money. But for us in society, it's wonderful that people try all kinds of things, right? Because from time to time, something randomly succeeds. So there's a different question about the cost to the entrepreneur versus the cost to society. And by the way, I think science is the same thing, right? We get research funding from companies and from the government, and many things we do don't turn out well, but from time to time something turns out well, and it's good for society as a whole. So I think I would not want startups to do only safe things, right? I think startups should do, for the benefit of society, startups should do lots of crazy stuff, and sometimes something would work out. At the same time, I don't think it should be completely random. So I think taking risk and failing, I think is perfectly fine. I think that most startups people have a view of what is the problem they're solving. And they're solving a problem that is their problem, right? And in some sense, it's a wonderful idea. You have a particular problem with something, and you think about an app that would solve this problem, and just your view of it, and you basically are focusing on your view. And this is an egocentric view, right? We often think that kids have this problem. When you have a kid, they think that everybody sees what they have. If I'm a kid and I have a wall here and I have some candy, I think everybody can see the candy because it's there. Turns out we don't really get over this problem. We think that everybody kind of has the same view as we do to a large degree, and very good entrepreneurs have problems that they are having or they're thinking about, and they want to solve their own problem, and they think everybody else has the same problem. This is where people just need a broader understanding of human nature. Right? You need to basically step out of yourself and out of your own view of what's a problem and what's a solution, and you need to understand a little bit about psychology. Now, I think that entrepreneurs should have to actually take some classes learn something, understand about human behavior, because if they're not, actually let me say differently, there are startups, there are technologies that don't need human touch. You're designing some device for a satellite that goes up there, no problem. But if you're doing something that touches a human being, it's really important for you not to have just your own intuition. It's really important for you to understand how human beings work in general. And you should start with this general understanding, and then you should go ahead and refine it. And I think what's interesting is that experimentation is expensive and difficult. And it takes some talent in doing. And I think because of that, most companies are not spending time on it. Right? It's almost like everybody knows that in principle it's a good idea, but it's too costly now and it would slow us down. But it turns out it's a really good next step to take, because it might cut a lot of waste in the future. So I think having some culture of experimentation and some kind of rigorous procedure where you have to prove that what you're doing is actually going to work in cheaper, more expensive, as a prototype. I mean, we can think about the whole range of things. I think it's something that company needs to get into their standard procedures. The only company I know that does this is Intuit. Right? And Intuit, anything you want to add has to go through testing. And they have labs, and they also have focus group, and they have surveys, and they have in-product testing. And there's a particular procedure, and unless you do those things, your idea would not get into the product. And I think it's incredibly important discipline to have, and I think all companies would. I can't think about a single company that would not benefit from it.
Okay, these are all the questions I had for you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, my pleasure.